Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. All right, see, where Paul is writing in this, he has gone through this whole thing about ministry, and how serious ministry of the new covenant is, the ministry of reconciliation, how that the Corinthians themselves are a product of his ministry. You are a letter from Christ, ministered by us, not with ink, but by the Spirit of the living God. So Paul's relationship with the Corinthians is in this. And then he's talked about this bad influence of these unbelievers who are trying to blind their minds like everybody else and turn them into Jews instead of Christians. And then he says, finally, I heard from Titus, and I know you've done good about what I wrote you the first time, so I'm encouraged. And he's got more to say about the negative side, but before he says it, he says, let me tell you about a good work that we're all involved in. I want to encourage you about this good work. So this brings us to chapter 8. He says, we declare to you, brethren, we make known unto you, brethren, the grace of God which has been given among the churches of Macedonia. Now, underline this phrase, the grace of God which was given. Does that ring any bells with anybody?
Couple.
What bells does it ring, Aaron?
Well, when Paul uses this phrase, the grace of God that was given to us, in every other, well, not in every other, but typically how Paul will use that phrase is in relationship to spiritual gifts.
If you were here, I'd grab that little narrow head and I'd give it a kiss.
I'm so thankful for conference recording.
That is exactly right. So, knowing Dan's proclivities, it's hard for Dan to ignore that. And, people usually think of the grace of giving. But if you'll go to Romans chapter 12, for example, and that list of spiritual gifts in Romans 12, if you'll go to verse 8, notice the second gift that is listed in verse 8 of Romans 12 is the gift of what? Did I say Romans 8? Romans 12, verse 8.
No.
Romans 12, verse 8. The gift of giving. So see, giving is a spiritual gift. And some people actually have the spiritual gift of giving. And if we understand 1 Corinthians 14 and other places, we can pray for spiritual gifts. And God will give us spiritual gifts when we pray for them. So this seems to me, as I'm trying to really read Paul and not read other things into Paul, it seems to me that he's saying that God has given the spiritual gift of giving to the people in the churches of Macedonia. There seems to be a plethora of people in those churches who have this spiritual gift of giving. And so he says, because, see, the evidence of that is in verse 2, because in much testing of affliction, their joy has overflowed in spite of their depth of poverty, abounding in the riches of their generosity. So even though they're poor, their joy and their generosity has overflowed, and so they're very willing and very eager to give. They have the gift of giving. Now, does yours say in verse 2, does the last part of your verse say the riches of their generosity, or does it say something else?
Something else.
Liberality.
Yeah, New King James has riches of their liberality.
Liberality, same thing. Liberality meaning not liberalism, But liberality meaning they're freely giving. They're wanting to give as much as they possibly can. Their hands are open, not closed. They're not pinching their wallets tight and holding them close. They've got their wallets open and they're wanting to give all that they can. See, that's liberality, not liberalism. Those are two totally different things. All right? So, generosity or liberality, correct. So, they've been tested, it says, in their affliction. Does yours say affliction in verse 2 or tribulation?
Yes.
All right. And remember in the first chapter, Paul talked about affliction and comfort, tribulation and comfort. So these people in Macedonia are poor. They're under at least economic affliction, and yet they want to give. They seem to have the spiritual gift of giving. Verse 3 says, "And not according to their own power, I testify, but beyond their power." And then he says, beyond their power, let's see here, of their own accord, of their own desires, they were begging us with much entreaty to share in this grace or in the grace of this ministry toward the saints. Now, beyond their power, of their own accord, willingly. Some of you may translate it willingly there. Anybody translate it willingly, of their own volition? Their own accord, all right? So it's not just that they gave, it's that they wanted to, that they were motivated to beyond their ability, which caused them to give more than anybody thought they should be able to give. All right, then he says, praying, begging with much entreaty for the sharing, the grace of sharing in this ministry unto the saints. And it's a little bit intriguing to me that we have the word grace here again. Because the word grace is in verse 1, where he says, the grace of God which has been given among the churches of Macedonia. And then again here in verse 4, he says, while they beg with much entreaty for the sharing of this grace in the ministry toward the saints. This grace, this gift. If I interpret the word grace the same way as I do in verse 1, you've given us a gift of giving. So we want to share this gift in this ministry toward the poor saints in Jerusalem. Brother Ben.
I was just going to say that the NASB uses participation where you're saying grace or sharing.
Well, when I'm saying sharing, that's the word that they're translating participation. Read me your translation there, Ben.
Okay. Begging us with much urging for the favor of participation in the support of the saints.
All right. They translate the word grace as favor.
Okay.
But they're ignoring the fact that the word grace, the exact same case and everything, occurs in verse 1. See? And I'll bet you in verse 1 they translated the grace of God which was given.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's the same word. So I think he means that we want to share this gift that God has given us by participating in this ministry toward the saints. Now let's take the word ministry in this as well. The ministry of reconciliation, the ministry of the new covenant, the ministry of the Spirit, the ministry of righteousness is the ministry of the saved toward the lost. Okay? But now he's talking about a ministry to the rest of the saved, a different kind of ministry, a ministry to the saints. This is a service to saved people, to other saved people, a good work to involve these people in, which is inwardly focused in that it is directed toward other Christian people. But it's outwardly focused in that it's not just about them and their own congregation. It's about moving outside of themselves. A little practical hint here. If there's a church, and I heard Jeremiah talking about a church, I have no idea which one or anything, but if there is a church and that church is doing absolutely nothing in any way, shape, or form to reach outside of themselves, that is an extremely unhealthy church. See? And, the whole Great Commission suggests that we've got to be reaching outside of ourselves. If you find a church that's not doing that much, but they're spending money on mission work and stuff like that, at least they have it in their mind that they need to do something to reach outside of themselves. But Paul, I think, if I read this letter right, is thinking, okay, these people have had lots of struggles, they've had a lot of problems, they've had to correct all these, they're battling these false teachers. We need to get them together instead of divided and get them together in something positive, something good. And so he's emphasizing this unifying project of giving to these fellow saints in Judea. And he's giving an example of some very outwardly focused folks, the Thessalonians, I think he means, and the Philippians up there in Macedonia, who are very much interested in giving, and they have the gift of giving, the grace of giving. All right? So that, verse 5, he says, after they were urging us, begging us to share this grace in the ministry toward the saints, he says, and it was not like we hoped, but first they gave themselves to the Lord and to us through the will of God. Now there's two things here. They gave themselves, number one, to the Lord. See, if you haven't given yourself to the Lord, then you'll never give like God wants us to give. Because giving myself means taking the selfishness out and being subject to the will of the Lord. The more we give away self and let God control our life, the more we realize what we have belongs to God and that we want to use what we have in the work of God in some way, shape, or form. And so the giving of the self was really the prerequisite of giving to God, because people who haven't given themselves are more selfish and they don't want to give to God. They are begrudging givers. They are reluctant givers. They are not cheerful givers. They are not glad to give. They may feel obligated to give. They may do it because they think they have to, but they'll be minimalists. They'll give the least amount they think they can get away with. See? This is not the gift of giving as he's describing it here. Okay, so think of it this way if you're thinking of Paul. You know, in one spirit you were all baptized into one body, whether Jew or Greek, slave or free, and you were all made to drink from the one spirit. Remember that? And then the book of Ephesians says, so be filled with the Spirit. So if you're drinking from the well of the Spirit, if you're filling your life with God and you're more and more submitting your heart to God, then part of that is going to be the fruit of the Spirit in you that's loving and generous, and you'll be more possessed by the spirit of giving, see, as a result. So the gift of giving is going to be in people that really want to do the will of God. And I think maybe also some people have the part of the gift of giving probably has to do with the ability to say no to self about some things and to control one's spending and finances to some degree. So anyway, these people here gave themselves, he says, first to the Lord, that's number one, and he says, to us. I think that Paul felt like the Thessalonians and the Philippians, particularly the Philippians, would do anything for him. They really had seen serving Paul as serving God, and they had not only given themselves to God, says Paul, but to us. But when you go back to chapter 6, verse 11 through 13, where Paul says, hey, we've opened our hearts to you. We've been very open and unrestricted to you. Will you not open your hearts back to us and pay us back in kind and treat us the same way? He didn't feel this same willingness in the Corinthians to give to him. In fact, Paul didn't even collect any support from the Corinthians. The Philippians supported Paul, and other congregations supported Paul, not the Corinthians. So he says, those people in Macedonia who have the gift of giving, they have given themselves first. And then he says, so that we even encourage Titus that just as he began, so also he should complete toward you this grace. In other words, Titus must have been the one who got it into the minds of the Macedonians in the first place that we want to get together this contribution. Paul sent him out. Titus was drumming up these support from these different churches. And so now we want to complete this grace, complete this gift by the giving of it. And in this case, Titus is the one that began to push this with the Corinthians. And Paul now wants them to complete it. Now let me see if I can explain this. The gift is worthless unless you do something with it. The grace of giving is worthless unless it's actually produces something in action. If it's just intentions, if it's just good wishes, and it never comes to fruition in actually giving gifts where they can do good, then the grace of giving is not completed. See, it's not completed until, as what was that Cuba Gooding in Jerry Maguire, he said, show me the money. Show me the money. Show me the money. Okay? So it's when we show God the money, that's when the grace of giving reaches its completion. All right? So Paul says, for just as you abound in every way in faith and in word and in knowledge. Now look at these words in verse 7. In faith and in word and in knowledge and in those things are spiritual gifts that are like listed in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. See? And he seems to be saying you're really good at those things, but I'm not so sure you've got much of the gift of what? Giving. See? So maybe this is a spiritual gift that they need to pray for. Like they prayed for the gift of interpretation, because some of them could speak in tongues but not interpret. Maybe they ought to be praying more for the gift of giving instead of just praying for the gift of interpretation so they can speak in tongues in church. Maybe if they really gave themselves to the Lord, they pray for the gift of giving. Okay? So I think that's what he's saying here. I may be totally all wet, but I'm getting this from the vocabulary and phraseology of the way Paul uses these phrases. Okay? For just as you abounded in everything, in faith and in word, meaning in revelations from God, and in knowledge, and in all diligence, he says, and in love from you and among you, he says, so that you might abound in this grace also. Notice the word grace again. This grace also. Well, this grace, meaning, chapter 8, verse 1, the grace of God which was given among the churches of Macedonia, meaning the gift of giving, he wants them to abound in that gift. Now, they were big on the gift of tongues. But what about a greater gift, a more spiritual gift, a more profound, personality-changing, globally affecting gift like the gift of giving, which could really change your life and your thinking and your attitude and the way you handle everything? See, that's what Paul wished that these Corinthians would abound in. How could they get from where they were to where they needed to be? I think one of the ways is to pray about it. Now, how would you pray about this? I think something like this. Lord, I want to have this gift in my life. And Lord, I realize it's hard for me because I've never had much and I've always had to depend on myself. And I don't trust people and I don't trust circumstances. And I try to have all my bases covered before I do anything. And it's hard for me to see that I can improve in this thing with giving. I sometimes feel like I'm being selfish. I don't want to be selfish. I want to be generous and I want to be really excited about giving, but I'm not right now. But Lord, I need you to help me. I need you to change my heart. I need you to help me get my priorities straight. I want to be more like Jesus, you know. I pray that you'll give me opportunities to do this. Help me to trust more and stretch a little bit. You know, I'm thinking that kind of a prayer is the kind of thing that we should pray. Then, in addition to praying about it, I think we should do it. I'll give you an example. Last night, while the rest of the congregation was in evening worship, I'm in my office with several Hispanic people, and I'm talking to these Hispanic people having trouble in their family and everything. And the husband and the wife aren't getting along because they're having problems with the daughter. And I suggest to the husband and the wife that they give each other one non-sexual hug once a day and just give each other a good hug with two arms around there. Not one of these, but one of these where it's good, you know. And that you give one of those a day and just give a good hug each day that's non-sexual. Well, the guy, he was just like, oh, no. It's just not me. You know, I'm just not that way. And I said, but do you want to help your marriage? And she told him that maybe she could use a hug, you know. And so just one hug. Well, here's my point. My point is the only way they're going to change that at first is to try it. So first it might be awkward. Okay, it's time for my hug. Okay. Okay, now you've got it. Go, leave me alone. Then they try it again tomorrow. This is amazing. This is not as bad as I thought. Then they try it again the next day. Lay the head down maybe. Oh, nice. Then maybe they start about 2 weeks in, like actually looking forward to their hug. I'm just saying, you stretch yourself a little bit and you act yourself into a better way of feeling. See what I'm saying? So even if you have to stretch yourself by saying, I've been given this much for so on, if you raise it by $2, and it feels like a stretch right there, and you do that for 6 weeks, and you say, you know what, we got through this 6 weeks with that $2 extra, we're still okay. So you decide to step out by major faith and raise it $2 more. See? And you realize that the world keeps turning and everything, and all that stuff works out. Then you become major steppers, and you say, how about, since it's been a year, let's raise it $5. See, I'm exaggerating, but if you try it and it works and you're blessed and it helps you look at it differently, you not only pray about it, but you practice it in little baby steps, and you realize it's going to be okay, and then you begin to do things differently, see? And this is the same way in relationships in marriage. If they've been communicating in wrong ways, they have to practice doing things differently, even though it feels awkward, until it starts feeling okay. See, and they develop new habits. That's the same thing we have to do in regard to giving. So Paul is encouraging these people who have not as demonstrably possessed the gift of giving to abound in that grace. And that doesn't happen overnight, but he's going to try to help them with that. Anything you want to ask or bring up about that first paragraph there down to verse 7? Aaron.
If I'm reading this properly, if I'm hearing you right, then the grace that is referred to here has to do with spiritual gifts as it did in Romans 12. But then also, the Corinthians, as you're saying, didn't demonstrably have this gift, but Paul was still obligating them to possess it. And so, when we talk about someone having the spiritual gift of encouragement, or if we just go through Romans 12 in exhortation or things of that sort, then someone not possessing that gift is not an excuse to neglect that area.
It doesn't mean they don't have any of it in them at all, but they could certainly grow. It could certainly expand. It's like the gift of giving is more than just putting something in the plate. It's a desire. It's a propensity toward really wanting to be generous and to look for ways of being generous. And see what I'm saying? So he's saying that, I think if you read especially the first letter, see, they were so focused on these temporary, showy, public, really not deeply spiritual gifts. And they weren't as focused on the gifts that would benefit everybody and the gifts that were deeply life-changing. And he said, you need to be focused on something like this. Because you can pray for these things. Now, some people say, I'm just the way I am, and that's the way I'm going to be. Well, that's too bad. Because if you don't believe God can change you and you can really become a partaker of the divine nature, and that God can really add to your faith moral excellence and to your moral excellence knowledge and to grow these things in you, then what did Peter mean when he said grow in the grace and the knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ? So I don't think we're all obligated to have these things to the same degree, but if we find a deficiency in us, I think we ought to care about correcting it. I don't know if that helps at all, but
yeah, it does.
But if you follow this, you've got the word grace in verse 1. You've got the word grace in verse 4. You've got this grace in verse 6. And you've got abound in this grace also at the end of verse 7. So you've got it at least 4 times right there. And I've seen there's been a lot of people that have written about this grace also, or stuff like that about giving. But I don't know that I've ever seen anybody emphasize the fact that this was a spiritual gift. Has anybody else seen that in written form anywhere?
Never. Nope.
Okay, and it's a little difficult to understand why. I think I understand why, but because they're...
I put it in my first book.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So, look at read me your verse 7 there, Jeremiah. What are you reading, ESV or what?
New American Standard.
Read it to me, please, sir.
But just as you abound in everything, in faith and utterance and knowledge and in all earnestness, and in the love we inspired in you, see that you abound in this gracious work also.
All right, now you've got the word earnestness. Earnestness is what yours translates it. That is the word spoude. Spoude. Let me show you something real quick on the other camera. And I'll have to put my media up there, which I haven't done. Okay, now let's just see here for a minute. No, this is the wrong class, right? What class is this we're having right now?
This is 2 Corinthians.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me get back in 2 Corinthians. All right, let's zero in here on 2 Corinthians. All right, so at the end of verse 7 there, this earnestness, he says. Spoude, right there. Now read me verse 8, Jeremiah.
I am not speaking this as a command, but as proving through the earnestness of others the sincerity of your love also.
Okay, here again, the earnestness. Now this is the word that's often translated diligence, or sometimes it's translated make every effort. It means to try very hard, to be very excited about something. Now, if you go down a little bit further, let's go down to verse 16 there, Jeremiah, and read me verse 16.
But thanks be to God who put the same earnestness on your behalf in the heart of Titus.
All right, so Titus is very earnest. He's very diligent. He's very excited about the Corinthians. But back up here in these two passages, he's talking about the earnestness, the diligence of giving, this real zeal, this real desire to give. Look at verse 17. What does verse 17 says?
Verse 17 says, For he not only accepted our appeal, but being himself very earnest, he has gone to you of his own accord.
All right. So accepted our appeal about this ministry of giving to the saints. And see, you've got the word. Let me zero in a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. See, you've got in the first part of this, see the word spoudai right there? Well, that's the same root word as you have here. Spoude, spoudes. Down here, spoudain. And here you've got spoudai. That's being himself very diligent. See, it's a comparative. So Titus was very excited, very into the effort of giving. He was very motivated by this. Drop down to verse 22. there, Jeremiah. Verse 22.
We have sent with them our brother, whom we have often tested and found diligent in many things.
Now all of a sudden it's diligent. Now why is it diligent now when it's been earnest all the way through? But it's the same thing. So, and keep going. Oftentimes proved to be diligent, and what else?
But now even more diligent because of his great confidence in you.
Isn't that interesting? See this word here, even more diligent? Spudioteron. Look back up at verse 17. I can't help seeing that's the exact same word there in verse 17. Now, why am I coloring that word all the time? Because it keeps popping up in here. And so what does that word mean? That word means, we're going to go back to our regular camera because that view would drive us crazy. Let's just, since I don't have it on the text on the overhead, let's just go out like that so it won't drive us as crazy. All right, so what this word means to me in this text about giving is that Titus and the Thessalonians and Philippians had spude. They had diligence. They had, what was that other word? Earnestness. They had this excitement, this investiture in themselves that they were all into this giving. But this sense of diligence, this sense of earnestness, this zeal to do this seemed to not be there as much in the Corinthians. And I think that's because the Thessalonians had really given themselves to a greater degree, and so they were more eager. They were really excited. They were really open arms embracing this giving thing in a way that the other people were not. And this describes something of what the gift of giving looks like and doesn't look like. If somebody lacks this earnestness, this diligence, this attitude of I'm all into this, see, that's something lacking that we need to pray about and work on in our own life. And I'm speaking from experience, and it's still lacking to some degree in me. All right? So I think he's saying particularly in verse 8 and 9, that Jesus had this gift of giving. And Jesus was a giver. And it's obvious in the things that Jesus did that he was a giver. And that we want to be like Jesus. So he says in verse 8, I'm not speaking according to commandment, but because of the diligence of others, because of the earnestness, the zeal, the excitement of others, I want to prove your love by demonstrating it to them, or something like that. How do you have it translated? Verse 8.
I speak not by commandment, but I am testing the sincerity of your love by the diligence of others.
All right, I'm testing the sincerity. Okay, I can see that of your love by the diligence of others. Is that what he says?
Yes.
All right, the earnestness of others. In other words, he's comparing it to what the Macedonians are doing. He's seeing a different attitude in the Macedonians than he's seeing in the Corinthians. You'll find this in churches, in leaderships in churches, and I don't want you to be discouraged when you see it at first. People have to grow into this, but some leaders in churches are strictly, what do we have in the bank right now? And If we don't have it in the bank right now, there's no reason to even talk about it because we don't have the money. But one of our elders recently said to the congregation, he said, we've got plenty of money to do this work. It's just still in y'all's pockets, he said. Now, do you see the different perspective there? One group of leaders says, well, we can't do this because we don't have the money. But this elder here says, I know we've got plenty of money. It's just still in y'all's pockets. So we can do this. It's stretching the congregation, telling the congregation, let's do this. Let's join together and let's trust God and let's do this good work that we can do. If we can get some of that money out of y'all's pockets and get it in this plate. Okay? And, of course, he'd put some in out of his pockets as well. All right, so the testing of your love. Do you love Jesus? Oh, girls, do you love Jesus? Oh, yes, we love Jesus. Well, are you sure you love Jesus? Yes, we're sure we love Jesus. Then show me that money. Oh, show me that money.
New verse.
That's how it goes.
Just the girls, huh?
Sounds like Creflo Dollar.
They're the ones that do.
Yeah, but so see, that's really what Paul is saying right here. It's the testing of the sincerity of your love. Love not in word, but what's the rest of that?
Indeed.
Indeed and in truth. So, how do we show our love? We show it in action. And one of those actions is in our unselfishness, our giving toward things to which we need to give. All right? Now look at verse 8, translated like this. I'm not speaking as if giving a command, but as a result of the diligence of others, talking about the Philippians and Thessalonians. I am testing the authenticity of your love. In other words, do you really love Jesus or not? Verse 9. You know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, for your sakes he became poor. In other words, he gave. He gave up everything. He left heaven. He was God and gave up his divine prerogative to become a human being, a poor human being. So though he was rich, for your sakes he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might be made rich. So see, the Philippians and the Thessalonians, even though they were in poverty, they had this overwhelming desire to give like Jesus did for the benefit of others. See? And so Paul is pointing that out to them because being willing to be impoverished to some degree for the good of others is what we have in Christ. All right, so Paul says, and I give my judgment in this, for this is better. It is better for you who made a beginning a year ago, not only to do, but also to desire to give. So, a couple of things here. He says that they need to have more of the want to give. And he also says that they started planning this a year ago. Are you raising up a hand, Jeremiah? It's kind of fuzzy there. Yeah, you are. Okay, go ahead. That's a shocker to me. That's a shocker. Go ahead. Speak to me.
Okay. I was curious about verse 8. Is it accurate to connect that to Paul's view of grace and works? He says, I'm not speaking this as a command, as in you don't have to give to be saved. You're not going to earn your salvation, but you give because of your faith. Is it fair to do that, to connect that to that viewpoint that he has in Romans?
In other words, say it one more time. It's not because you have to, but because what?
It shows authenticity of your faith. What I'm doing is I'm recalling Paul's view of works in Romans. You can't earn your faith by doing works. But then in James, we have James saying faith without works is dead. Well, that's because the works show authenticity of your faith.
Yeah,
This
would be more like James here in this. He's really talking more about what James is talking about in this passage, and not about what he's talking about in Romans. Notice how I qualified that in this passage.
Yes.
Because he's talking about demonstrating the authenticity of our love through action. He does not use the word works or faith in this. But the thought is more akin to what's in James. All right, so another point here in verse 10, he says that they made a beginning a year ago. This reflects planning. This was not a seat of the pants sort of thing. This was a thought out kind of commitment, which means that I think there's a principle here which goes back all the way to the Old Testament, as we talked about the other day, that our giving should not be seat of the pants. It should be thought out, planned type giving. I think elderships that challenge churches to plan and purpose are right into the spirit of what this passage would teach, that people are supposed to plan and purpose. But on a very practical level, let me say this to you. This is from 43 years or so, years of experience preaching in churches. It won't do you a lot of good to preach on giving a lot. What will do good is you can hit this about showing our love through giving, but what will do more good than anything else in actual churches is to preach on the good works that you want to do, that the church wants to do, and get the people to get behind those good works. See, the work of God. This is a great work of God that God would be pleased for us doing. Now, let's join together and do this, and let's be generous in this. See, you'll catch many more flies with that. You'll get a lot more money in the plate with that. Here's the problem. Take the church you were talking about, Jeremiah. Let's say they don't have anything planned. They don't have any good work planned. They don't have any outreach to the community planned. They don't have anything else. And yet you get up there and you try to preach on giving. The people in the pew are thinking, why should I? We're not doing anything. It's just, why are we giving any money to the church? The church isn't doing anything. See? So just preaching we ought to give falls on kind of deaf ears if the church is not demonstrating that it's involved in the work of the Lord. Yes, it's a command of God to give. But it's also a command of God for the church to be doing the work of God. So my suggestion would be, if I can't get excited about giving in a particular church because that church is not doing anything, I need to go to a church that is doing something so that I can give to the work of the Lord. Okay? And if that church is not doing something, it needs to change. It needs to start doing some things and watch the people get excited about that. So what I found is, if eldership put together a presentation and it really demonstrates all the works that this church is involved in and what we're doing, and we're putting this much into this and this much into this, and we plan to expand this and we plan to do this, and look at the souls that are being won through this, and now because of these things, we're asking you to get behind us and really give. Well, I've never failed to see a church respond to something like that. But they will not respond if we just preach about giving with no target in mind. Well, in this case, there was a target, there was a need. There were saints, brothers and sisters in Christ that were suffering in Judea that needed the help of God's people, and there was a target. See? So the gift of giving has a target. You might write that down. The gift of giving has targets. It is targeted. And if the church doesn't have a target for the people to shoot at, then likely the people will not give. Now think back even in the Old Testament time when God urged them to, we're giving to support the Levites, we're giving to support the priesthood, we're giving to build the tabernacle, we're giving to rebuild Jerusalem, we're giving to do whatever it is, There was a target in the giving. So give your church a target to shoot at. A worthy target. If they don't have a worthy target, you got to give them one. Does that make good sense to everybody?
Yep.
All right, then you can, when they're giving, then on top of that, you can say, okay, our giving is a way of showing our love to God because we're doing God's work through our giving in this way and this way, and we're showing our love. Use these passages. But just a sermon on giving without a target is just not very powerful. It gives a sense of duty. Oh, yeah, I know I gotta. But why do I gotta? Well, God said so. Yeah, but that's true and that's good, but there's more to it than that, see? So, give your giving a target. All right. Let's look at verse 11. Read verse 11. I didn't get that far. He says, so now complete the doing of it, so that just as you had the willingness to desire it, or to participate in it, so also you might have the willingness to complete the gift. So, okay, you said, yeah, okay, we'll get involved in that a year ago. And yeah, we'll take part in that. But now, show me the money. See, let's get together. Let's do it. Let's bite the bullet. See, that's the idea. It's more than the desire. It's following through on the desire. And the following through on the desire is the act of love. It's the act of faith. It's the stretching oneself out and doing. See, Jesus didn't just desire to do the will of God. He went all the way to the cross. He did it. And he did this so that we could be enriched by the saving grace of God. He didn't just think about doing it and say, yeah, I'd really like to do that. It's sort of like several times a year I'm getting fatter and fatter and fatter, and I say, I'd really like to lose some weight. I really need to lose some weight. My wife looks at me and says, honey, you really need to lose some weight. And I say, well, man, am I looking fat? And she said, well, you can't fit in your clothes. And and we go to this wedding and we're sitting there and she's saying hi to all of her friends at this wedding. And she says, and yeah, she pats me and says, and yeah, he's doing pretty good. He's gained a little weight, and pats me, like this. So in other words, what she's telling me is, you're fat. And you need, seriously, you're fat, she says, and you need to lose some weight. Well, that's good. I say in my mind, I need to lose some weight. But until I decide not to eat certain things and start exercise and stuff, I don't lose weight until I follow through. So these guys said, okay, well, we'd like to be involved in it, but they really weren't making the commitment maybe yet like they needed to. And then the most misunderstood verse, I think, by the church in chapter 8, verse 12. He says, for if the willingness is present, It is acceptable when one actually has the gift, not when one does not have it. That's Dan's translation. For if the willingness is acceptable, it is acceptable when one actually has the gift, not when one does not have it. And if you look at the previous verse, that's what he's saying. He's saying that it's not just the intention that's acceptable. It's when you actually write the check, when you actually put the money in the plate. See, that's what's acceptable. Now, most people try to make verse 12 the out verse, the excuse verse. They try to make it say that God just cares about the willingness. God doesn't care about the actual gift. That's not what that verse says. In fact, that verse says the opposite of that.
Would you mind saying that, doing your version of that verse?
Yeah, let's type that out again. For if the willingness is present, it is acceptable when one actually has the gift, comma, not when one does not have it. So you can write down by 8:12, write down by that verse, show me the money. It wasn't that boring, was it? It wasn't that boring.
I apologize. That was good, Dave.
Thank you.
Okay, y'all have a great day.
What?